Hello, my name's Jade and today I will be going through the books that I read in my second year of university. I already have two of these videos up and I explain my course in both of those. I'm doing an English literature and creative writing degree. I'll link those both down below. I normally do them per semester, but my year was a little bit different this year. So the university I go to, you can choose which modules you do, which is my favourite thing about my university course. So everything that I learned, more or less, is stuff that I chose to learn. This year I was creative writing heavy, whereas the other year I was English literature heavy. That obviously affected the books I read, particularly because I took two English literature modules in one semester and then none in the other one. So there was a bit of imbalance. I read way more books for my first semester than I did for my second one, so I figured I should just lump them all into one overall video. That being said, that I did obviously read more for English literature. A few of my creative writing modules had a lot of reading for creative writing. One of my core modules that I've taken both years and I was a short story writing module. I read a lot of short stories and I continue to do that. This year there are three books in particular that I had to read from. I think two of them was like the Great American Short Story Volumes 1 and 2 by Richard Ford. The second one was like a British equivalent. I think it was Bradbury. I've read a lot of short stories. I read a lot in my first semester as well. I can't remember all of them off the top of my head right now. I just know that as well. There are some compulsory humanities modules that we have to take each year, and normally you do bits and bobs of reading for that as well. I've got a couple examples with me today. Normally I show you the books in order that I learnt them in / read them in. For this first one I can't remember, and I read them kind of all over the place because I read some of them over the summer before going back to uni. So they're just going to be in order of what I read them in according to Goodreads. The first module that I'll be talking about would be my post-colonial module. This was an English literature one. The first one I read was The Longest Memory by Fred Degar. This is about a slave in the US and it takes place from multiple perspectives. So it goes from the slave's perspective and then slave owners' father, and there are children. Something bad happens at the beginning. I'm exploring that and exploring the whole slave process, I guess, and slave life and all the different people that are involved in that and what it kind of entails. Really eye-opening. Put yourself in that situation, what it might be like and just how awful it was. Glad to have read it. It's one of those. And it was written really interestingly. In terms of school books, I'd give it like a 8 out of 10. In terms of regular reading books for funsies, I'd give it like a 7 out of 10. The next one I read was Bridie's Fire by Kirsty Murray. This follows an Irish girl during the Ireland famine, and I didn't know this. There's a lot of orphans left over, so they would go to the workhouses and the orphanages and stuff, and they would take Irish girls and send them over to Australia, which was a lot newer back then, and have them be maids and such over in Australia. And this follows Bridie, who is an Irish orphan from the famine, and she goes over to Australia. I loved this so much. It was really interesting. I loved the history aspect of it. It was a very different way to think of post-colonialism from like the other ones. I just loved the character. I loved reading it. In terms of school books, I'd give it like a 9 or a 10 out of 10. It was really interesting and I really enjoyed reading it, which is really nice for a school book. In terms of regular books, I'd give it like an 8. Solid read. Next, we have another great one, which is Second Class Citizen by Butchie Mechia. I'm butchering these names. I apologize. This follows Ada, a woman from Nigeria, and she moves over to England. She's kind of dreams about England all her life. Her husband moves over to England for education reasons, and then she and her children move over with him. And it's about the kind of struggles that she has just in her entire situation, particularly when in England, their lack of rights in general. Within her own culture, being a woman is looked down upon harshly. In England's culture, being an immigrant is looked down upon harshly, so she's like, no matter where she turns, she's kind of stuck. And she's a really well-educated woman and a great mother, and so it's really hard seeing this really strong person with so much potential just like being battered around. It was great though. I loved the main character. Again, I'd probably give it like a 9 or a 10 out of 10 in terms of school books, and in terms of reading books for fun, I'd give it like 8. Again, a really important story, and it's really eye-opening. It's heavily based upon Butchie. If you read Butchie's story and what happened to her and then read this, they're kind of the same thing. So I have so much admiration for her. Then we have The Fat Black Woman's Poems by Grace Nicholas. So this is like an anthology of poetry, very different from me. I'm not one to sit and just read poetry for fun. Very much like an analysing poetry kind of person. I love analysing poetry. So reading this wasn't so much fun, but then in class we really got into it and I ended up using it for my assignment. Just to let you know, I used this one for my assignment and I used Second Class Citizen for my assignment, and then I used another one that I'm going to talk about in a minute. It's kind of someone that's more so adjusted to England, slightly unique from the other books, but it's just kind of the way the flat black woman is judged. It has some really interesting points in there, I think. In terms of reading it for funsies, I'd give it like 6 or 7 because I'm not big on poetry. In terms of like analysing it for school, I'd give it probably like an 8, 9 because there's a lot of good stuff to get into in here. Then we have The Lonely Londoners by Sam Selvon. I think my lecturer did a really good job at kind of like picking a range because again this one's slightly different. This is about a group of men who are living in London. They've lived in London for a little while. They came over during the Windrush, I believe, and it's kind of the way they've adapted to London, what their lives are like. I can't remember which ones I wrote about for my assignment now. Might have been this one as well. I think I might have mentioned it if nothing else. I remember looking at a lot of the Fat Black Women's poems, looking at a lot of this one. I think I mentioned this one actually. I don't think I actually wrote about this one. It wasn't my fave. The narrative style was hard. It's very stream of consciousness and it's very much written in their colloquial language, which is great. I just struggled with it. It took me a while to read therefore because it was a different perspective. It raises good points again. I feel like a broken record, but they all raise really good points. They all introduce you to different perspectives that I think are really important to consider and kind of reflect upon and realise what we did wrong and grow from it. In terms of reading for funsies, I'd give it like a 6. In terms of school reading, I'd give it like 7. Next we have Crick Crack Monkey by Merle Hodge. I think this is the other one I wrote about my assignment. If I can cast my mind back, I'm pretty sure it's this one. I really like this one as well. This is one of the ones that I enjoyed more. Again, slightly different. They're all very different. This one takes place Trinidad. Lots of them deal with people who are in England or are trying to adjust to living in England. This place takes in Trinidad. However, it's the difference between the more local way of life and the more colonised way of life, which can be seen in certain people trying to be more white and civilised. And it's about her struggle between these two families. Again, really loved the characters in this one. I really loved the story. I really felt for the main character. I just had a really nice time. In terms of reading for funsies, I give it like a 7.58. I didn't love it as much as I loved the other ones. School reading, again, about an 8. There's a lot to pull from it. Well, maybe like a 9 in terms of school reading. This is one of the better ones. And then the last book that I read for my post-colonial module is a play called My Beautiful Laundrette by Hanif Qureshi, which is about, I believe it's Pakistani family living in England and them trying to run their business. It hints a lot on the racism and stuff that was targeted towards them in the 80s, I think this is set. It touches on homosexuality as well and kind of power and money. Again, completely different perspective that I wouldn't have never looked into was it not for this. Also watched the film that was made of it. Very different reading it to watching it, I will say that. I think I preferred reading it to watching. I didn't particularly like the acting, I guess, in terms of reading. Normally I'd give it like a 7. In terms of school reading, like an 8. So those were all the things that I read for my post-colonial class. The other English literature module I took was a Shakespeare module. For this I had a love-hate relationship with Shakespeare because I hate reading it. I'm really bad at like translating the language as I go along. So I always buy translated editions and be really lazy and just read the English versions and then go over and analyse the Shakespeare English later on. So I was kind of worried about taking it, but I have found Shakespeare plays really interesting in the past. I loved this module. I loved it so much. I really hope I get to do Shakespeare again at some point. I don't think I will. So I really like Shakespeare. I'm really bad at reading it, but I really like doing it. Again, I'm going to go through these in the order that I read them. Not sure if this is necessarily the order that I learnt them in, but we're going to give it a shot. There's only 6, so it wasn't too intensive reading because they're all plays, so they're somewhat short. The first one I read was The Taming of the Shrew. Didn't know a lot about this one, never heard of it before. 10 Things I Hate About You is based on this apparently though. That's great. Love that. The overall story isn't anything too complicated. Pretty decent. Not the best thing ever though. In terms of regular reading, I'd give it like a 7-ish. I think it was pretty funny at times. In terms of school reading, I'd give it a 8.5. It was pretty decent. Lots of gender themes to dig into for analysis. The next one is The Winter's Tale, which I had watched this one previously, so I knew the plot. I wasn't the biggest fan of reading it though. It was really slow, it was really dense. I would much rather watch it than read it. I'm glad I have read it so now that I fully understand it. But I much preferred analysing it and doing the class on it, talking about it than I did reading it. So in terms of reading it regularly, 4. In terms of analysing it, I'd give it like an 8, 9. But I didn't like reading it, so I'd give it like a 7.5, I guess. The next one was Julius Caesar. Pretty decent. I liked this one. I didn't know tons about Julius Caesar, but I do love like Romans and kind of that time period, so it was nice to kind of see Shakespeare's rendition of that. In terms of regular reading, I'd give it like 6 or 7. In terms of school reading, I would give it 7, I think. It was good, interesting, but not mind-blowing or anything. The next one is Much Ado About Nothing, which is another comedy one like The Taming of the Shrew. Had a similar relationship to The Taming of the Shrew. Don't think I liked it quite as much. I had a lot of fun with The Taming of the Shrew, I think, reading it. In terms of regular reading, I'd give it like a 7, and school reading, I guess like an 8, because we had a lot of really fun discussions. Again, lots of gender, lots of mishap. Definitely want to make you think and discuss. I don't think any of these plays, apart from one of them maybe, are like my favourite things ever. They're all just very okay, they're interesting, they've got a lot of layers to them. I enjoyed reading Much About Nothing and Taming the Shrew. Julius Caesar was okay, didn't really like The Winter's Tale. Speaking of that theme, Henry the Fourth parts 1 and 2. We only did part 1 in class. It was okay to talk about. I wouldn't compare it to talking about any of the other ones though, and I didn't like reading it. I hated reading it. In terms of regular reading, I'd give it like a 2. School reading, I'd give it like a 5 maybe, I guess, because talking about it was interesting, but I hated reading it. I barely got through it, putting that away now. The last one, which I kind of feel like I'm cheating now, because I didn't read it, because I've already read this so many times and know it so well. Couldn't bring myself to do it again, and I didn't need to. I was fine without it. It's Othello. This is one of my favourite ones. I did it for my A-level. I know it very well. It's kind of like an old friend to me now. By this point, I really like Othello. I really like the themes. I know the story so well. I love the setting. I love it when he sets things places like Verona and Venice. In terms of regular reading, well, the thing is, I'm biased because I know it so well at this point that it's not even on the same level. I'd give it overall just like an 8, 9 out of 10. For one of our humanity modules, there was a little bit of reading, not necessarily required. There's lots of extracts and stuff, but there were a couple things I did end up reading because I was interested. One of them was David Mamet's Oleana, which is a little play, got a lot of gender stuff going on, very modern. In terms of reading it, regular disease 7, but in terms of analysing it, I'd give it like a 9. It was really interesting, that class. Really glad I went to it and I read it. And then another one was Wide Cigar Saucy by Jean Reese. Really liked this one as well. In fact, I like it so much that I ended up using this for my project. I compared it to the Yellow Wallpaper, so I feel like I should mention this. I've also written about this for my A-levels. So I compared the two and I looked at like madness in toxic relationships, and I loved just everything about it. It's like a take on The Mad Woman in the Attic from Jane Eyre. Before that, it's very feministy. I really liked it. I've not read Jane Eyre. I think when I do, if I do, I just won't be able to stop thinking about this. Just regular reading, give it like an 8. In terms of school reading, like a 9 or a 10. So now we're on to creative writing modules. The first I did in the first semester, and it was like modelling creativity. So it's kind of like the psychology behind creativity. I love psychology. This module wasn't my favourite because it spent like an hour in each module, and there were so many modules. It was very intense. Writing the assignments was quite hard for me, but I really enjoyed the lectures. It was one of those weird ones. One book that we had to read for it. It's The Science of Human Innovation, Explain Creativity by R. Keith Sawyer. As you can see, it's huge, and I think that was my biggest problem with it. It was so big, and it was so much waffle, so much dancing around topics before we actually talk about them. Stuff it's talking about is interesting, but also it's non-fiction. Not used to reading non-fiction as much, so I guess I found it harder to read because of that as well. In terms of regular reading, I'd give it like a 2. In terms of school reading, maybe a 4, because I guess it was pretty interesting at points. And that brings us on to the very last module that I took. In terms of reading, this is probably my favourite because we read some really modern, good stuff. I'm gonna show you these in the order that we learned about them and stuff, discuss them, which I also do think is the same order that I read them in anyway. And this module is called Writing the Novel. It's funny because I'm not actually finished this one yet. One of the assignments was to analyse one of these books, and then the other assignment is to write the opening chapter of a novel. The first book I read for it was Lullaby by Leela Slimani. It's a mystery thrillery type. The baby is dead. It only took a few seconds. That is literally the opening line. It opens up the crime scene. We go back in time and we're trying to figure out what happened. How did we come to this? I really enjoyed it. It was really interesting. The ending kind of annoyed me. I wasn't satisfied with the answers it gave me. In terms of regular reading, I'd give it like a 7.5. It was fun, but I had frustrations with it. In terms of like analysing it, it's got a lot of really interesting themes going on. And in terms of school reading, it's just like a great book to read. So I'd give it like a 9, solid 9. The next one is a YA one. It's The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas. This was huge a little while ago. I really liked this. Really interesting perspective that is very far removed from my privileged perspective. I love the main character. I flew through it. And this is what I wrote about my assignment. There's a lot of themes that I could dig out here. So in terms of regular reading, I really liked it. I'd give it like a 9. Really important story. Highly, highly, highly recommend. In terms of school, I give it like a 9. The next one was Conversations with Friends by Sally Rooney. She also wrote Normal People. I think it's a debut, but I'm not sure. I don't want to explain what it's about in too much detail. I think just know that it's kind of about friendships and kind of like a coming of agey type ordeal as well. They're at university and they're kind of learning about relationships and friendships. Like, reading it, I thought I wasn't gonna like it, and I really hated the characters at first. I thought they were really pretentious and phony. I thought I wasn't gonna like it. This is not how people act. And then I realised that actually when she was like a complete drama queen and said that thing, that is the kind of thing I would have said in my like hormonal raged body of like a 20-year-old. So I think it's actually a really true reflection, and I think that's my favourite thing about it. It's a really true reflection of being young, and that's kind of a lot of what it's about. And it helped a lot because mine is also a lot about friendship and kind of coming of agey type stuff and being young. In terms of regular reading, I'd give it like a 7.5, maybe an 8. Probably an 8. In terms of school reading, 9. It was great, interesting stuff. The next one I read was Call Me By Your Name by Andrew Achiman. At first I didn't like it. I was like, this is so flowery and poetical and I want to get to what he's saying. And then I started listening to the audiobook by Armie Hammer, who is also in the movie. I started to get into it more, kind of become obsessed with it for a little while. Long story short, I loved it. It's a love story. Beautiful. It takes place in Italy in the 1980s. There's only really like 1 or 2 sections in here that I didn't like. But like an 8.59 out of 10 regular reading, and 9 in terms of school reading. It was great. And then the last book, I never actually got to talk about in class because the assignment had already been given in, so there was not really much point, but I loved this. This is The Girls by Emma Cline, and it's kind of based on Manson family cult. I really, really liked it. I can't say why because there are a lot of plot elements that frustrated me. The narrative has played around with it a little bit. Some of that stuff kind of frustrated me a little bit. I really liked it. I really enjoyed reading it. I'd give it like an 8 out of 10 regular reading wise. I can't say school reading wise because I didn't talk about it, but I'd like to think it'd probably be like a 10. It's definitely different, definitely interesting. Got like that historical things. It takes place in the 70s, I want to say. I would recommend it, especially like coming of age girls. There's a lot of themes in there that I think are important. And those were all the books that I read in my second year of university. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have an amazing morning, afternoon, evening / night. My name's Jade and I hope to see you again next time. Goodbye. Then we have the flat. Hello, my name's Jade. I did not clap. For analyzing.